Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the LITE Teaching Show. In this episode, we are talking to Alison Voice and Susan Preston. Alison is a senior lecturer at the School of Physics, and she's a LITE Fellow, and she's also recently been appointed a National Teaching Fellow too. Susan, at the time of recording in April 2021, was a third year student in geography, but she is now working as a Athena Swan project officer in the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Cultures. In this video, Alison explains the theory behind spaced repetition. She talks about how she's encouraged students to use that method and the success that she's had, all whilst Susan and I ask her questions. As always, with these LITE teaching shows, we have a little bit of fun along the way, with the editing especially. And I will say this was recorded in April 2021, just before the barbershops had reopened, so there is some interesting hair going on. But without further ado, I'll hand you over to Alison.
I suppose what I wanted to explain was the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, because this applies to all our learning. When we first learn a topic, our memory rises and we know the material well. And then if we don't look at it for a while, it decays. And we might say mathematically it decays exponentially, but basically it's dropping off fast at first and slower, but it will just decay away. But if we top up that memory, revisit the material, think about it, whatever, you can get back to your previous level of learning. And then the rate of decay is slower, so it takes much longer to forget it. And then if you keep topping up, and these can be at longer and longer intervals, you can keep your level of knowledge sort of topped up, and it will decay ever more slowly. And this is Ebbinghaus is a psychologist. This has been known for over 100 years. But I don't know how you find it, Susan. I find that really explains how all of us learn and sadly rapidly forget things.
I just think it's really interesting. I definitely agree with the theory in my experience. Like when I was doing my GCSEs, I think the fact that I was kind of going over that material maybe like every 2 or 3 weeks, it was, yeah. I remember going back over the notes and just being like, yep, know this, and yeah.
It's the same with anything, whether you're playing sport or an instrument or learning to drive or whatever it is. If you keep practicing, you keep those skills up, but as soon as you don't, your skills decay away. So I suppose using this in education, my view is that students need to keep practicing the material. And how do we encourage students to do that when life is busy? So if I said why we need to keep some memory going, I think it's because if you're going to discuss and critique some material, you sort of need to know it. I think it also helps you see links between topics. You've talked of seeing those higher level modules and drawing on stuff you've learned earlier. It's easier to learn the more advanced material if you've got a sound knowledge and still can remember the earlier stuff. You have that sort of platform on which to build the more advanced knowledge. And also I think you need to learn stuff because it's difficult to look something up if you don't even remember what it was. So all that is to say, the way I think I try to help students learn their knowledge and be able to remember it is through the process of spaced repetition, or some people call it spaced testing. And that is just to regularly test yourself on the key things you know. There's various research out there that shows how this works in higher education, but it's all very much been in controlled environments. Students are brought into a room, they are taught something, they are tested. It's an unreal situation. Whereas my research has been, can this bring benefit to students in a real classroom where some of them will engage with it, some of them won't. They're doing their own study, their own revision, they've all got their own methods, that's going alongside it. But is there benefit from some spaced repetition throughout the learning phase and not as a sort of cramming revision? So what I did with my physics students, these are classes of sort of 100, 150, and I did this research over 3 years, is to use a web app alongside everything else they've got in the module, purely optional. They can use it if they want, but there were lots of key questions of all the things they need to learn so that they can keep testing themselves. And then I could monitor when they used these questions, how often they repeated them, and I could compare that with their end of module exam result and to see if it had any effect. And it did. So for students who used it in this spaced way, they had a 10% advantage on other students in the exam. And 10% is a degree classification. That's taking you from a 2-1 to a first, or a 2-2 to a 2-1. So that's just freely optional alongside students who choose to use it. We're getting that advantage.
With the forgetting curve and the topping up of the knowledge, is there any research done on how that is returned after the exam?
So I tested that out. So part of my research was to say, after the summer vacation, and the students have now moved into the next year, I did an impromptu test with them. So they didn't know it was coming, and it was just very much really core material that I had taught them. And again, this 10% advantage of students who had done the spaced repetition.
I'm interested in whether maybe some courses or subjects kind of lend itself better to the curve, or just kind of the spaced repetition in general. Like,
I think what you might put on your flashcard or have coded in your app would be very different for different subjects. So my subject is physics. I want students to know key laws and equations and graphs and that kind of thing. And that is what I expect them to learn. But maybe in your subject, maybe it's, well, you tell me, what are the things that a human geographer just has to know?
It's mainly processes, like key terms and like who the theorists are, who they've said, what they've said, and yeah, it's mainly that, and like maybe a few facts as well.
So I think you're exactly right. I think each subject will be very different, but there are things that you need to know as a geographer, and there are things you need to know if you're a chemist or an engineer or a historian, and it's those things. So that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about putting an essay on a flashcard. We're talking about key facts. What should be at your fingertips? It's that kind of knowledge.
Thanks for watching this edition of the LITE Teaching Show. We have other episodes with Dan Trousdale here and with Neve Mullen and Peter Matthews here. So take a look.